let's react to Laura's video called Why Everyone Looks the Same Now, the Death of Unique Beauty.
Why does it feel like everyone looks the same these days? Scroll through social media and it's like there's one face dominating the world. Flawless skin, plump lips, and perfect symmetry. Just a few decades ago, beauty was a celebration of individuality. Strong noses, unique bone structures, and personal quirks that defined the faces of the 20th century. So what has changed? And why are we all chasing this version of perfect?
With people getting the same procedures and also with the growth of interest in Botox and fillers, I think faces are starting to resemble each other. And now that we have all these trends that people are trying to essentially copy all around the world, this wide distribution of information through social media, people find out about the trends and then they see their favorite influencer having had a certain procedure perhaps, and then they want to emulate that. So people start to take on a similar appearance, I think. I think that's some of what's driving this.
In the 21st century, the ideal face has become shockingly homogenous. Trends like the Instagram face defined by sharp cheekbones, plump lips, a button nose, perfectly arched brows, and poreless skin dominate our feeds.
Because of some of the filters that exist on these various social media platforms, people are starting to not even look like themselves. It's not really how they look in real life, but they're applying certain filters. So it's like almost this artificial version of themselves that then other people are chasing. So some of this is influenced by the digital renderings essentially of our faces, not just how our faces look after certain procedures.
But here's the thing, this look isn't entirely natural. It's a product of filters, photo editing apps, and cosmetic enhancements like fillers and Botox. Social media algorithms amplify this trend by rewarding posts that align with these beauty standards, encouraging millions to imitate what gets the most likes and engagement.
Well, I don't think the platforms are specifically trying to amplify these standards per se. I think that that's what people are attracted to, and when they're viewing an image or a video for a longer period of time, that's when the algorithm picks up on that and starts to push it further and further to broader audiences. I think that's what's going on. Platforms, I think, are a reflection of our current views and current societal norms, rather than the platforms somehow manipulating how we view things. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg phenomenon, but I think that the platforms are truly just a reflection of what society deems as more normal or acceptable or preferred at any given time.
Cosmetic procedures that were once reserved for the elite, like lip fillers, nose jobs, and jawline contouring, are now more accessible than ever. In the United States alone, non-surgical cosmetic procedures have increased by over 200% in the past 2 decades. Clinics market treatments as quick, easy, and affordable, leading to a normalization of enhancements that create this ideal face.
And surgery plays a big role here too. And oftentimes people forget about that because many celebrities just talk about the non-surgical things that they've had done, but they fail to report the surgical enhancements as well. You know, we'll see if she gets into it, but a lot of people have this, I would say, misconception that it's just non-surgical tweakments that are getting people to have these appearances. But as we talked about heavily in the past about buccal fat removal and that hollow type of cheek look, that's something that surely cannot be attained with just injectables alone. So there's really more than just non-surgical treatments that are contributing to these types of appearances.
What is fascinating is how technology fuels a cycle. These social media platforms allow users to see the perfect version of themselves with just a swipe. Filters smooth skin, enhanced lips, and slim faces instantly. This makes people feel like their real unedited selves don't measure up. And let's not forget the rise of celebrity influence. Stars like Kim Kardashian and Kylie Jenner have redefined modern beauty standards, turning features that were once seen as unique into exaggerated must-have trends. These standards trickle down through social media and influencer culture, creating a phenomenon where people over the world aspire to look like the same person.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I feel like while it's good for their businesses, you know, it sometimes doesn't tell the true story to people. If someone's not aware, for example, that a Kardashian may have had a surgical type of procedure, a cosmetic type of procedure, they might not know what it takes to kind of have that type of face. Just doing injectables may not get them there. And I think in some ways that further brings out that kind of competitive advantage that some influencers have by not telling the masses about the surgeries they've had done. I think you can look at it from like maybe someone more of an altruistic perspective to say that, oh, maybe they're protecting, say younger women from feeling like they need to have these different changes done. That might be a positive thing. But on the flip side, they might be further pulling away from the masses as far as making themselves stand out and making it so that, they have something that others cannot attain because of some of the access that they have and some of the resources that they have that many others don't. So I guess it depends on what prism you're looking through to evaluate what's going on here.
This isn't just about looking good. It's about fitting into a system that rewards conformity. Studies show that posts featuring conventionally attractive faces get more engagement, likes, shares, and even brand deals. So it's no surprise that people are pressured to invest time and money into achieving this aesthetic. But this raises a big question. If everyone's chasing the same look, what happens to individuality? Are we trading away the uniqueness that once made beauty so interesting for a polished but ultimately uniform ideal? It's worth asking, are we following beauty trends or are they following us? And who really benefits when we all start looking the same?
Yeah, a lot of great points here, and we've spoken about this on the channel previously, but there are of course risks in following just the latest trend, especially if you're doing something surgical, but also with filler. We have a video that we recently released about how filler doesn't completely go away. And there are some changes of filler that will remain in your face even after you've gotten the filler dissolved. So I think that we have to think long and hard before chasing some trend that will be gone, let's say in a few years, and then you're left with these permanent changes to your face that you cannot easily reverse, whether it was with surgery or sometimes non-surgical procedures. And as far as conforming to some general, beauty standard, I think it's always best for people to focus more on what makes them special and unique. And if there's something that's specifically been bothering them for a long time, maybe at some point getting that addressed if they understand the true pros and cons of those procedures, rather than seeing some famous person and saying, hey, I want to look like them. I think that can lead people down a dangerous road where they might never be fully satisfied with how they look.
Let's take a journey through the decades to see how beauty evolved in the 20th century. It's fascinating to look back and see how each era had its own distinct style and celebrated individuality in ways that are so different from today. The 1920s marked the rise of the flapper, a bold, modern woman who embraced short bobbed hair, thin eyebrows.
Yep, look at those thin eyebrows. I was just going to say that.
And dramatic makeup. Clara Bow, known as the It Girl, epitomized the decade with her heart-shaped lips and doe-like eyes. Beauty wasn't about perfection.
Yeah, and look at the fullness of the bottom lip compared to the upper. I know we often talk about making the upper lip fuller, but in that era, it was in to have a fuller lower lip and a thinner upper lip, and that's actually what tends to be more natural for the human face. So looking to fill the upper lip to the moon is usually not the best aesthetic approach. And it is interesting to think about, just like fashion changes and cycles back around, so too, how we treat our face and facial aesthetics also does the same. Those thinner eyebrows came roaring back in the 1990s, for example, and now we're in this time when really full eyebrows are much more in. There's probably going to be a time in the future when people are going to want to start plucking their eyebrows again, right? It tends to be this type of cyclical pattern.
The 1950s are often considered the golden age of beauty. Marilyn Monroe's hourglass figure, platinum curls, and red lips defined sex appeal.
And we have a video on whether or not Marilyn Monroe may have had plastic surgery, so make sure to check that one out.
While Audrey Hepburn's delicate bone structure and pixie cut showed that beauty could also be graceful and understated, Grace Kelly's timeless elegance added yet another layer to the decade's diverse beauty ideals. What's striking about the 50s is how varied beauty could be. Marilyn and Audrey and Grace were all icons, but they embodied completely different versions of femininity, allowing women to see beauty in multiple forms. The 1960s were all about breaking the rules.
And remember that in the 1960s, that's when breast implants were first introduced.
Twiggy's boyish frame and exaggerated lashes made her a global sensation, while Brigitte Bardot's messy, sultry look redefined bombshell beauty. Meanwhile, Diana Ross brought bold, unapologetic glamour to the Motown scene, inspiring women to embrace natural textures and bold makeup. Beauty was about self-expression, rebellion, and individuality. By the 1970s, natural beauty and individuality took center stage. stage. Farrah Fawcett's feather hair became the ultimate girl next door look, while Cher pushed boundaries about her dramatic style and bold features.
And we also have a video about Cher if you're interested in watching more about her.
Beverly Johnson made history as the first black model on the cover of Vogue, signaling a shift towards greater diversity in beauty standards. This was a decade where people celebrated authenticity and self-expression.
Yeah, well, I love that. I mean, I think that's awesome because, there are so many different ways for someone to look and feel beautiful. And I think that's amazing that, they were celebrating that in that decade. It sure would be nice to go back to some of those ideals now. And maybe she's going to get to that in a bit. But yeah, I think over time we've started to morph into this more standard way of looking. And I think part of that is what the procedures that we're doing now give us, right? So if a facelift generates a certain look, if filler generates a certain look, right, then that is going to guide how people see themselves. And as they get those procedures, potentially, they're going to start to look more and more like others who get the same.
And what made 20th century beauty so unique was the celebration of differences. Each decade had its own trends, but they were built around individuality, personality, and culture. Unlike today's homogenous beauty ideals, these icons didn't try to look like anyone else. They embraced what made them stand out. These women weren't celebrated for fitting into a mold. They were celebrated for breaking it. It's a powerful reminder that beauty is far more compelling when it's personal and perfected. And it's true to think about all the different unique looks of the 20th century, and even when you watch old movies, you can really appreciate just nice seeing a non-filled, overly plastic surgeried Botox face.
Yeah, I like how she said, especially that first part, beauty is more compelling when it's personal. I don't agree necessarily with the perfected part. I don't think there is such a thing as perfect beauty. But again, I think shifting more towards optimizing features that people already have is the way to go, rather than trying to turn yourself into someone completely different or someone who resembles, maybe the icon of the decade. I think it's always best to accept who we are, how we generally look. But I also think there's nothing wrong with some adjustments to our appearance as long as it still retains that kind of those core elements of who we are. And I also think getting there with procedures being done at the appropriate time is also very important. People starting filler and Botox, for example, when they're 18 is generally much too young. I think people getting facelifts now in their 20s and early 30s is also a concerning trend in my eyes, right? So there's a time and place for these various enhancements that people are looking to get. And if anything, I think one of the biggest problems is that people are starting too young. The issue also with starting too young is, look, the face is going to keep changing. And if you've started getting procedures, at a very early age, chances are the number of procedures you have once you're older is just going to be, several magnitudes much higher than if you started getting some of these procedures later in life. And also the costs, start to accrue as well. It can get quite expensive, especially when you add it up over years. Also, we don't yet know how all of these procedures performed early in life are going to fare as we age, right? How is it going to look if you had a facelift when you're, 28, when you're now 58? Will you have had then 5 more facelifts by the time you're in your 50s and 60s? And how about the increased risk of certain surgical complications, right? Like nerve injury risk will go up as we start to do more and more of these revision cases. Also, the risk of bleeding as we start to, work in more scar tissue is going to go up. These non-surgical procedures also leave quite a bit of scarring. So whether that's from radiofrequency energy, whether that's from filler being injected over the course of years, that's going to build up more scar tissue. So when someone does go in for a surgery, it's going to be harder for the surgeon to do, and also inherently there'll be some increased surgical risk. So those are all things that people need to think about, especially as they start getting these procedures earlier in life.
And it's true to think about all the different unique looks of the 20th century, and even when you watch old movies, you can really appreciate just nice seeing a non-filled, overly plastic surgeried Botox face. Sometimes it's shocking. I'm like, oh wow, their forehead's moving.
And also allowing for the aging process to take shape, right? Because if someone who's in their 50s and 60s is starting to look like they're 30, and someone who's in their 20s is starting to look like they're in their 30s, everyone starts to look almost like a similar age, not just having a similar face, but it's hard to tell people's ages apart, and that can get sort of confusing to many people in society.
But as Hollywood expanded its influence during the mid-20th century, so did the beauty ideals. Actresses like Marilyn Monroe and Grace Kelly became global symbols of femininity, and their looks began to set tone for what was considered beautiful worldwide. In the 50s and 60s, the rise of television and glossy magazines made Hollywood and Western beauty standards accessible to a global audience. Women in Europe, Asia, and beyond began adopting American beauty trends, from wing eyeliners to pin-up hairstyles. At the time, beauty brands like Revlon, Max Factor, and Estee Lauder began marketing their products internationally, tying beauty to consumerism.
Yeah, I think this is a great point. Money is a big part of this, right? So whether it's a makeup company that wants to sell their makeup all around the world, or maybe it's one of these manufacturers that makes filler, right? And they're trying to sell more of it, or one of the neurotoxins, right? And they're looking to just, sell more. So of course, they're going to want to spread their message as broadly as possible. And in this day and age, it's very easy for those messages to spread. Before it was through television. Now we have, various social media platforms. So the message spreads essentially instantly. Getting those messages out is going to increase how much money, especially these mega companies, can make.
Because social media has replaced TV and magazines as the main source of beauty inspiration, but instead of showcasing diverse ideals, these platforms amplify a single universal aesthetic. Whether you're in New York, Seoul, or Brazil, chances are you're seeing the same contouring tutorials, lip filler transformations, and glass skin routines. And as a result, a homogenized beauty standard that prioritizes symmetry, flawless skin, and exaggerated features. It's efficient for beauty brands to market one aesthetic globally. After all, it's easier to sell products that promise to achieve a single perfect look.
Even when it comes to hair surgeries that I do, a lot of times when we post a result, people will say, oh, well, you should have gone lower and you should have gone, straighter with the hairline design. But, it has to fit with how the person's face looks, it has to fit with the degree of hair that they have left, and it also has to fit with their preferences. Many people, as they age, they don't want to look like they did when they were 17. They want to look like a more advanced, aged version of themselves, but still be age appropriate and still overall look youthful, right? But not like they were 16. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of distortion in how we think about beauty standards today.
But in doing so, we lose the rich diversity of regional and cultural beauty traditions. And beauty brands play a massive role in shaping these standards. In the 20th century, brands like L'Oreal and Maybelline tailored their campaigns to regional audiences, but now they aim for a global appeal. This means selecting models and creating campaigns that reflect the idealized version of beauty: plump lips, smooth skin, and perfectly arched brows. Even technology plays a role here. Social media algorithms prioritize certain looks that fit into this ideal, which further solidifies the single narrative of beauty. And this is why we see influencers and celebrities from all over the world adopting the same features and beauty enhancements. What's sad is that globalization doesn't just standardize beauty, it often erases cultural traditions.
And also, I feel like we don't leave room anymore for imperfections, right? How often do you see someone posting an image of a scar that they have or a makeup-free face? Surely some people do, but many people just want to post the most perfect version of themselves. So they'll have, a whole lot of makeup on, and then they'll be a filter placed on top of the image because, God forbid, someone spots something that looks slightly not perfect, and that's just not, I think, the best way to do this. I think celebrating our individuality and celebrating some of our quote-unquote flaws and imperfections is a very positive thing, and I think it helps us cope mentally with the aging process. And there are ways for each person to adjust their appearance within reason and still maintain their uniqueness.
Individual beauty feels authentic because it tells a story. When we look at someone like Frida Kahlo, her face isn't just aesthetically interesting, it's a reflection of her identity, her culture, and her life experiences. Her unibrow, her piercing gaze, and the way she styled herself weren't about fitting into a standard of beauty.
I think it's okay to grow a unibrow. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a unique feature. I think people should be free to experiment, to look different, and I think we should be less fixated on some perfect version of the human face. I mean, there's really no such thing. And I think the sooner people understand that, the sooner they'll just be happier, potentially. So imperfections are normal. For example, when I evaluate the face for cosmetic surgery, I'll always see some differences from one side to the other side in a person's face. I point that out to people just to show them that, hey, after surgery, you'll also have these asymmetries because you started with them, and because there's no way to make the face perfectly symmetrical because the bony structure is different from one side to the other. And if you try to make the face look perfectly symmetrical, it just looks weird and odd. So I think people need to celebrate that rather than look for perfection.
On the other hand, often feel flat. They focus so much on symmetry, smoothness, and perfection that they strip away the quirks and imperfections that make us human.
Yes, preach, Laura. Agree with that.
It's like looking at a picture-perfect cyborg AI person without a story. Think of the icons of the past. Lauren Bacall's intense stare, Barbra Streisand's strong nose, Eartha Kitt's unforgettable charisma. These women didn't just fit into their times, they stood out. They were celebrated for their uniqueness, for having features that couldn't be replicated or mass-produced.
Dared to be different. That is essentially what we're talking about here. And at Feel Confident, at least, we celebrate that uniqueness that each person has. And while we, of course, are trying to create skincare and hair care that can appeal to people and can enhance their daily routines, we also respect the fact that, look, everyone's going to be different. Not everyone's going to react the same way to the same moisturizer, right? Everyone has to find what is the right fit for them. And there's no perfect skincare or hair care that's going to work for everyone all the time. I think we all just need to find what works for us and accept that we're special and different and beautiful the way we are. And even if we go through certain surgeries or non-surgical procedures, we still are maintaining our unique features and not trying to look like someone else. I think that's key.
And it wasn't just about celebrities. Everyday people in the 20th century also embraced their individuality. Beauty was influenced by local cultures, personal styles, and a sense of self that couldn't be replicated with a filter.
And also look how people dressed at that time. I mean, this is amazing, right? Everyone's so glamorous and, really cared about how they appeared as far as, just even for the daily stroll. And that's pretty cool. Even myself, I go out in like sweatpants, sweatshirt. But I think there's something to be said for, maintaining that sort of glamour. And I think in some ways we've lost that, right? In some ways we're trying to do all these, glamorous things with surgery and fillers and whatever makeup, but we're also, dressing a bit different. I don't know. It's just, it was a different time.
In the past, imperfections weren't something to hide. They were something to highlight. Freckles, crooked teeth, or even a unique jawline were celebrated as marked of character and identity. Think of Cindy Crawford's iconic mole or Lauren Hutton's gap-toothed smile. These so-called flaws became their signatures, making them unforgettable. But today, imperfections are often erased. With filters, editing tools, and cosmetic enhancements are used to smooth out every line, bump, or scar. What's left is a version of beauty that's polished but forgettable. It lacks the depth and intrigue that come from real, lived-in features.
And as much as people are trying to, for potentially their own sort of personal gain, and if they're trying to move up in their workplace, or if they're trying to get some influencer deals, they're trying to look like, let's say, a Kardashian or what have you. But I think in doing that, they're not creating that uniqueness, that individuality that can help them propel to be an even bigger influencer potentially. If you're trying to just imitate what someone else has done, that can only take you so far. I think if you're looking to catapult to a whole other level of, let's say, even influencer, you have to create your own unique look, your own unique aura, and that is something that is harder to do. And it might not look exactly like the mold of today, the accepted mold. And I think that's what it will actually take for someone to reach a higher level of success. It's not about copying just the next person and what they're doing. It's about trying to do your thing and growing your brand, right? So I think even from a business standpoint, it's good to celebrate, your uniqueness, right? And trying to build an audience around that.
And I think this is why so many of us are nostalgic for the beauty of the past. Those vintage faces remind us that beauty isn't about fitting into a box. It's about standing out. They remind us of a time when individuality mattered more than perfection. It's not just about appearance, it's about authenticity. The beauty of the past feels more relatable because it reflects humanity in all its raw, imperfect glory. It wasn't about looking perfect, it was about feeling something. A photo or a face told a story. Today, it almost feels like we've lost that emotional connection in our pursuit for the ideal. Individual beauty is captivating because it's real. It draws you in and makes you want to know more about the person behind that face.
Yeah, it seems like the people who are really succeeding through social media these days are their authentic self. And that, I think, is what it takes for someone to be able to build up a following, right? People want to see real, especially in today's day of like some AI stuff and, where that's all going and making it harder to tell what's real, what's not real. Someone who is, facing the people is their true self each and every time is going to be more relatable and is going to stand out as opposed to someone who's just essentially being a copycat.
When we celebrate someone who looks different or individuality, we celebrate diversity, culture, and the richness of a human experience. Beauty isn't just skin deep, it's about who you are. So how can we bring back individual beauty? First, we need to let go of this obsession with perfection and stop idolizing this flawless, symmetrical features that aren't real, because a lot of it's AI and filters that make people look that way, and it's not real, it's not reality. Maybe it's the gap-toothed smile, a birthmark, or even something else unique about yourself. And representation is key. There's a lot of creators that are like, embracing this.
And the hard thing now with social media is that if you post something and, things are not perfect, then you'll get a ton of comments about probably the specific features that you're already self-conscious about, right? People will start pointing that out. If it's a gap-toothed smile, for example, they'll say, hey, look at your teeth. Oh, your teeth. And when you see tons of those comments, as I sometimes do on my videos, you have to have enough inner strength to be able to say, hey, that's fine that they're saying that. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I'm over it. I've heard that a million times before. But I can tell you, even from someone who, is very strong and, mentally, very, very much intact, I still sometimes get thrown off by certain comments that I feel like are just extra rude or sort of get under my skin, right? So, we're all just human, and not everyone can withstand that type of criticism and feedback, right? That comes from someone, being an online personality or just really anyone posting on the internet.
Whether it's having your natural curls or going without makeup, there's just reject what is now. I don't know. I'm just over seeing the AI phase too. I feel like it's kind of boring and not very exciting, especially when you watch older movies and you can see people expressing themselves. Everyone looks different. I don't know. There's just something about it. And then I guess that's why they always have that phrase. They don't make them like you used to. Like when you watch like even a movie from the 80s or 90s, it's just, I don't know. There's something different about movies nowadays. Everything almost feels like that made for streaming look, that aesthetic. Everything's slapped together really quick. The movies just aren't as creative. Everything's a remake. And it just kind of feels like that with what people are doing to their faces. We're all some AI cyborg remake and we're all trying to look the same instead of just being ourselves.
Yeah, it reminds me of, the movies that are being made now, especially for the big screen. Oftentimes it's like a superhero movie, but it's not like a new superhero movie. It'll be like Batman 5 or like Iron Man 6 or Guardian of the Galaxy, 5. It's always like these remakes now. And it's rare for us to get like a really unique superhero movie, right? And it's the same thing that she's talking about here with human faces, right? It's rare that someone who's really unique and different and imperfect comes out and says, hey, this is me, and I'm gonna revel in my uniqueness, right? That's not common. And of course a lot of it has to do with the way that businesses are run and the risk that people who are funding, whether it's a TV program, whether it's Netflix, whether it's a movie that's being produced, how much risk they're willing to take on with someone who doesn't sort of look the part for today's standard.
It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. Like, how are we still going to continue on like this? I guess it depends if these Kardashians will ever topple down, or if maybe they'll change their look, because it seems like they're just the ones that always kind of set these standards. Like when Kim Kardashian got really skinny, everyone decided that skinny is in again. But if you think about stars like Cindy Crawford, who had the mole on her face, even Cindy Crawford, her look looks different.
And I think plastic surgeons today have a role to play in all this, right? I think that we need to push people more towards, in some capacity, potentially just accepting how they look in the first place. But if they're going to want to adjust something, to adjust it in a way that still fits with their unique features and not trying to turn them into someone else. Because some patients come in with that request, right? They want 20 things changed about their faces. And that's a patient where I feel like saying no and encouraging them to maybe take some time and really think it through and maybe talk to someone about, their motivations for surgery. Why is it that they want to even do this? Maybe they should wait and reconsider. All of that is very important. But again, that has to be done in the context of people still trying to, make a living and do their jobs.
And it all starts with small steps. Maybe if people stopped using the filtered selfies and all the AI to change their face and just celebrate on what makes you different. At the end of the day, beauty isn't about fitting into molds. It's about expressing who you are.
And I think if there comes a point where we're living more in like that metaverse that people talk about, that's going to become even more confusing, because it's going to be much easier to tweak something on our faces digitally and to potentially continue to adjust how we look, right? You can do that on a daily basis when it comes to a digital version of yourself. But then how is it going to be when someone sees you in person? Which you are they going to meet? And that's where I think it's going to get even more interesting. So as much as Laura thinks maybe we can reverse all these trends and go back to a time when we were just unique and beautiful and not AI, I think it's only in many ways going to get harder to do that as time goes on, because of some of the technologies that we have today and that are continuing to advance at a very rapid rate.